The intersection of endurance sport, health, fitness, and life. Challenging conventional ideas and empowering people with the science of self-propelled motion. This is the Endurance Experience Podcast, hosted by Tony Rich.
Well, it's been a year since the Endurance Experience Podcast began. We're now at the end of Season 2. And this is our second best of episode. And what a year it has been. There's so much that has gone on during this second season. From a pandemic to the current environment we're thrust in today with conversations of racial injustice. And let me start by saying that the transgressions that have led to the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and others are absolutely reprehensible. And I'm glad to see so many people of all walks of life stand up and say enough is enough. Okay, there's always going to be opportunists looking to take advantage of the situation, but they are far outnumbered by genuine people. Being black in America, you can imagine that I have a range of experience and thoughts that I've had, and I always take a step back and think versus just fire off daily posts on social media. I've seen quite a few of those, my goodness. So I've decided that I'd formulate my thoughts on this subject in a YouTube video that I'll post on the Event Horizon YouTube channel. So go check it out. Our channel name is just eventhorizon.tv. And, the focus of this podcast is, as the intro says, the intersection of endurance sport, health, fitness, and life. Well, this is certainly the life part. So I might even have a podcast, or at minimum, try to tie in some of the concepts with a podcast guest that I think might have an interesting perspective. Maybe ask them a question or two on it. So look out for that. And so that's all I'll say about that for now. So for those that are new to the best of episode, I look back at a handful of the podcasts in the season and generally take a look at the ones that have garnered the biggest attention or are the most downloaded in that season based upon the statistics. And I play a clip from that podcast, maybe a 5 to 12 minute clip. And then I provide updated commentary on that clip. It's a great way for people to get a taste of the podcast and find out which podcasts are getting the most buzz. And then they can certainly go back and listen to those podcasts. But it's a fun episode to do. I enjoy doing it. Okay, the first clip is from a podcast with Hunter Allen. Hunter is the co-author of the book Training and Racing with the Power Meter, and he's the head coach of Peaks Coaching Group. Coach or athlete, if you want to become a better cyclist, you must pick up that book. The second edition took me into new direction. And I have the new edition now. I still refer to it. Go pick it up. Hunter is like, if you've ever seen Star Wars, Hunter Allen is the Yoda. He's the Yoda of cycling. He and the work that he's done with Andy Coggan, they set the foundation of everything that we do. All the coaches, all the cycling coaches, we use a lot of this body of knowledge in our training to this day. So we had a great podcast, and he's a great guy. So without further delay, Here is a clip from my podcast with Hunter Allen. It's giving you a way to draw logical conclusions from cause to effect on your training effort and what you need to do in order to improve as a cyclist. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. It's the we've moved from two different things. One, the purely subjective way of training, like how do I train and I feel like I'm training hard, right? Or I feel like I'm tired, and to an objective place of saying, oh, wow, you're really not training that hard. You need to train more intensely. You need to push yourself even more. Or you're not training in the correct energy system. You're not eliciting the correct training stress to improve this energy system. And then we moved from this response training. We've had heart rate monitors, which are still really important. I still wear my heart rate strap every ride. I encourage my athletes to, because I need to understand how their body is responding. And so heart rate is a response to the training that they do, right? It is a way to respond to that training. And that's a critical factor. But at the same time, that was like, well, that's response training. Well, what happens? My heart rate went up to 180. Why did it do that? Well, we didn't know. Did you just sprint up a hill? Did you, finish a 20-minute climb at your maximum? Did you have 6 cups of coffee and you're sitting on the start line ready to race?
Right.
It didn't measure the training dose. And so that's the next piece that really makes a huge difference and has created that change is that, now we understand the training dose. Here's the dose. Okay, I rode for 20 minutes at my threshold power, and here's the response. My heart rate went to 180. I incurred this amount of fatigue. I burned this many kilojoules of energy. I created this training load.
Right.
All of these things were are a key piece in how we changed, our training.
Right. Yeah, so the power meter, as you in the book, you guys described this how power is a direct measure of your effort, whereas heart rate might be a lagging indicator of what's going on, which I think is a good way for people to understand it. I remember some of my earliest memories was going down to the Museum of Science in Boston, and they had a bike set up, and the kids would go down there, and then they had several light bulbs, and you needed to get on the bike and pedal as hard as you can, and it was a little game to see how many light bulbs you could light up. And that's one of the things that when we use the word watt in the purest scientific sense, you could, if you put out 40 watts on a bike, you could literally light a 40-watt light bulb. Right. Exactly. And so that just it draws it all together that watts in the purest sense of the word is watts as we know it in the real world.
Right. It's a measure of work, right? It's a measure of work, and that's where it's interesting, right? Because there is an amount of energy, right, and that's the relationship that is required to light a light bulb, and there is an amount of energy that is required to do work. And so that's exactly the connection. Right? It's like, I'm going to get on that bike and I'm going to pedal hard and I'm going to pedal fast, and I'm having to use my energy to do that, which then is being converted into the energy needed to light a light bulb.
Yep. It's very interesting. It's fascinating. And let's talk about. So let's go into some of the metrics.
Okay.
So let's talk about. We can do them in any order that you think is most appropriate. But first, the concept of FTP and training stress score, whichever order that you think that they flow better.
Right. Well, let's talk about FTP first. I mean, FTP stands for functional threshold power. And, there's been, this is something that, we go back to 2005, 2004, where, Andy came up with the training zones, the classic power training zones. He built all of those training zones around that FTP, that functional threshold power. He called it functional threshold power because we're measuring power. It is a threshold at which you can ride, and when you go above that threshold, fatigue occurs sooner. And when you stay below it, fatigue occurs later. It is functional because you're actually doing it on a bicycle. You're out there doing it in a real-world environment. You're not just stuck on some random machine on in a lab somewhere, and it's actually here. You can use this. It's something that you can use on your bike every single day. So, the definition is the highest power you can maintain in a quasi-steady state without fatiguing. When you exceed it, you fatigue sooner. When you go underneath it, you fatigue in a longer period of time. Quasi-steady state means that, sometimes you go above it, sometimes you go below it. You're kind of hovering around this edge. And so that's an important thing. It was built around the fact that, in cycling in the U.S., that a very typical test for us as cyclists is a 40-kilometer time trial. It's also, that's the Olympic distance in triathlon bike leg. And if you ride as hard as you can in a 40-kilometer time trial, one of the goals as a cyclist is to do that in under an hour. So that really was the bar. It says, okay, well, your functional threshold power, your FTP, is the average power that you can maintain for an hour.
Right.
And based on that. And so that's really still the answer, right? It still is. And that's where that is. Now, over time, and one of the things that we proposed and have created in our first edition in 2006 was that, well, gosh, it's really hard to find a place to do an hour-long time trial for many of us, and without stoplights and traffic and all these crazy things. But we could more easily find an area where we could go for 20 minutes. So. And again, 20 minutes is a little bit easier mentally, than doing a full hour. So we said, hey, you can do a 20-minute test, subtract about 5% of that, and that should be a close approximation of what your hour power would be. Now, one of the things that's gotten forgotten, in history, which is kind of crazy to me to think that this is gotten forgotten, but at the same time it is over time. Stuff gets kind of cut out. Is that in order to really make that more accurate, and you need to blow out what we call your anaerobic work capacity. So before you do the 20-minute test, if you're going to shorten your test to 20 minutes, you need to do the 5-minute test first. So you're going to warm up, maybe you do some fast pedaling drills, then you crush it for 5 minutes, right? You kill it for 5 minutes. You do your very best 5 minutes, which is generally a measure of what we call your VO2 max. It contains a lot of anaerobic ability. For those who have a strong anaerobic capacity, it could be up to 2 minutes of that would be a part of that test. For those without, maybe it's only 30 seconds. But the purpose of that 5-minute effort is to rid yourself of the anaerobic work capacity, get rid of your freshness, give you a little bit of fatigue so that now you take a 5-minute break, and then bam, you whack out that 20 minutes. You start the 20-minute without that anaerobic work capacity, you feel a little fatigued already, then you still take the 5% off of the 20-minute number, and that makes it even more accurate to the hour test.
A great podcast with Hunter Allen. So that clip underscores the benefits of cycling, training with a power meter, determining your functional threshold power and your zones, and using all of that as a cyclist or triathlete to effectively help you train with a purpose. And so in our platform, Event Horizon, we've seen a renewed interest during the whole quarantine period as people were effectively forced indoors as all events got canceled. And, a wave of people started to getting more involved. We've already seen a trend towards indoor training, but we've seen more of a wave of people going into indoor cycling. Smart trainers were sold out for many, many weeks. People getting involved in virtual cycling like Zwift and Rowley. And you can even find my live sessions of me Zwifting on our social media platforms, Facebook and others. So people are seeing the benefit of training indoors, training with a purpose, getting measured and impactful results in all of that. So if you're jumping on board, I highly recommend the book by Hunter Allen, Training and Racing with a Power Meter. Check out his YouTube channel. It's pretty good too. He's always giving whiteboard sessions on this stuff. But if you get a power meter or a smart trainer, it's important that you use the approaches described by myself, Hunter, and other coaches. Oftentimes I'll see athletes and say, "Hey, I heard you got a power meter now." "Oh yeah, coach, I bought a power meter, bought a smart trainer." "Oh, excellent. You do your FTP test, you figure out your zones and all of that. Which platform are you using to analyze all this?" Crickets, right? So if you get all these tools, don't just get them to watch the numbers move up and down when you're riding. Actually use these, understand how to use all of the metrics and such to train with a purpose and get measured, impactful results. So that was podcast number 12 with Hunter Allen. For those that want to go back and listen to it, I highly recommend it. The next clip is from podcast number 14 with Britt Marie Hermes, Blowing the Whistle on Alternative Medicine. Britt Marie Hermes is a former, what's called a naturopathic doctor. She left the profession of naturopathy after discovering what she describes as some very problematic practices, and she ultimately became an advocate for science and evidence-based approaches to medicine. And she started a very active blog called the Naturopathic Diaries. And she now has a master's in science, and she's pursuing a PhD in evolutionary genomics. So this was a very interesting podcast. And we see endurance athletes get seduced into approaches that promise enhanced performance, faster recovery, and so on. And I'm talking about things like acupuncture, dry needling, cupping, etc. And so it begs the question, do these practices work? Are they reputable? Should you use these practices and sidestep the medicine, actual modern medicine, for these alternative medicine treatments? And so this was one of our most listened to podcasts, and I'm glad it was, because there are some very important discussions in here endurance athletes can benefit from. More to say on this after the clip. But here is PhD candidate Britt Marie Hermes. So, we deal with athletes, we deal with health and fitness professionals, and people that are in general healthcare, and we're seeing a $1 billion industry go into some of this stuff. And I wanted to talk to you about a couple of the ones that we see a lot, and we're seeing a lot of acupuncture and cupping. And famously, Rio Olympics, Michael Phelps, before his meet had the circles on his back, the broken blood vessels, and then but we see a lot of athletes seeking it out for what they perceive to be performance benefits or recovery benefits. So, from someone who's been deep inside the machine, help our listeners unpack these treatments and when they can go wrong or be either unethical or maybe even harmful.
Right. So have you talked about acupuncture or cupping at all, or should I briefly explain what these are?
Yeah, briefly explain what they are.
Okay, so they both come from traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM for short. And so acupuncture is the idea of lancing the body with these teeny tiny needles in specific points that will help a magical energy that is believed to be inside the body called qi move around. And the TCM practitioners believe that you get sick because there's something wrong with the qi. The qi is either stuck or it's not flowing appropriately, or you have too much qi. And so by accessing these specific acupuncture points, you can rebalance the energy in your body. And cupping is also from the TCM ancient world, but it's practiced by, let me see if I can explain this, by taking literally a cup, usually a glass cup, and then it's heated, and then it's placed on the body to create a tight seal or a tight suction, and this draws the blood to the surface, and then the cup is pulled off, and it makes a very satisfying popping sound when it does this, and it feels like a massage technique, but the act of having the cup sort of like suction wise adhere to the body creates these round bruises on the body, which is what you saw on Michael Phelps's back during that Olympics. So the type of cupping that I know of is called dry cupping. So I guess there's a form of cupping where like the skin is lanced and the patient bleeds, and I think that this is basically a form of bloodletting. I don't know that is actually practiced very often anymore. I'm not familiar with it. The one that I'm familiar with is the dry cupping, which just causes these really gnarly bruises. And again, it's the idea that you are sort of moving the qi and cleansing the blood and rebalancing the energy in the body to heal disease. Right. So both of these are based on an understanding of the body that is not accurate. Right. So traditional Chinese-based medicine uses a different organ system. In their version of anatomy, organs are placed in different areas of the body, and they have different organs than what we know to be true today, and the organs that are there do different physiological functions than what we know to be true. So all of this information that TCM is based off of, we know is wrong, yet acupuncture and cupping still diagnoses and treats using this old information. So that's like the first concerning thing from my perspective, is that you could be missing a real diagnosis, or causing more harm because you're using this system of medicine that is like super and totally wrong. Right.
And so you basically you can either just completely miss something that is really wrong, or just be seduced down the pathway to just forego conventional treatment altogether.
That's right. And I guess I should say, I didn't even explicitly say, but like there's no such thing as chi.
Right.
So there isn't, right? So this is the first problem. There's no such thing as this magical energy force that lives in the body. Either the body is working appropriately and is in homeostasis, or it's not. And whether or not the body is healthy or sick has nothing to do with chi or any other version of chi. Like, we sometimes hear it called prana, or
prana,
different.
Right. Yeah,
exactly. Different alternative systems of medicine call it different things, but we don't have magical energy in our body. We either have like healthy functioning organ systems, or we don't. And
right. And if anybody can prove as such, that, Stephen Hawking wrote 7 books. You won't find anything in there about chi. So if anybody can prove as such, there's a Nobel Prize in physics, medicine, just waiting for anybody who can prove first that chi exists, right. and secondly that they know how to stab it or cup it or access it to heal,
manipulate it, right?
A body. There's a Nobel Prize in physics and medicine just waiting, but people still seek it out, and then it's dry needling, and then there's also dry cupping, and then there's dry needling, which I think is just the same as acupuncture. I think, right?
Yeah, you're basically touching these points on the body with the intention to move chi.
Got it.
So as to whether it's ethical, now I think that this is an interesting and tricky question.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it depends on your perspective, of course. If it's being sold, so if I'm a practitioner selling you, Tony, cupping and acupuncture with promises of curing disease, to me that's like frankly unethical.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm selling you cupping and acupuncture with true informed consent, which looks like, listen, the evidence for this is really not very good. It might reduce some pain, but probably not any better than any other placebo therapy. And here are the risks associated with these therapies, and there are indeed risks. Mm-hmm. And you still choose to undergo the therapy. Well, then I think we can make the argument that the therapy has been carried out as ethically as possible, but I still think it's tricky because I'm charging you for this fake therapy, right? So I think what gets complicated here is that, especially like in the case of these Olympic athletes, is I assume these therapies are being carried out with the promise of better sports performance,
right.
or perhaps pain relief, or muscle recovery, or improved oxygen levels.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, whatever sports promise you want to add in there.
Yeah, but they all rise and fall on chi, though.
They all rise and fall on chi. That's exactly right.
Or
and at the end of the day, the practitioner doing the therapy probably, it doesn't look good for the practitioner carrying out the therapy either way, because either they're a true believer, which means they're terribly misinformed and perhaps, delusional,
mm-hmm.
or they know what they're doing isn't real, and they're still choosing to carry out the therapy and to make money off of patients. Anyway.
Right. So it makes sense. So somebody could genuinely believe, I know for a fact that this works, and they're carrying it out. Or someone knows about chi and knows that there's nothing, there's no evidence of chi and placebo effect, which we can talk about and such. But it seems to me that these treatments are very expensive. That's the other thing. It's luring people into very expensive treatments that they just have to keep coming back for over and over and over again. Yeah, for sure. So there's real risks with using alternative therapies. So one risk that you mentioned that I don't think gets enough airplay, honestly, is the cost of these therapies. And you're right, they are terribly expensive, and it's never a one-off therapy. It's always like
subscribe to this health plan. I need you to come once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, or whatever it is for X many months. And people often go for years on end.
That was Britt Marie Hermes from our podcast on alternative medicine. On Twitter, she's at Natural Diaries, so check her out. And then, her blog is naturopathicdiaries.com, where she chronicles a lot of her history going from a naturopath to PhD candidate. So she was amazing. I think she was very grateful with her time. She's on another continent. She's in a PhD program. Her spouse is in a PhD program, and she's got a young child, and she lent me a lot of her time, so I was very grateful. And I'm glad a lot of people found this podcast. It's very important, as many athletes find themselves being lured into this alternative medicine world. And so in the podcast, you have to go listen to it if you haven't. We talk about many things, including the frequent responses that you get from people when they talk about how they're doing cupping or acupuncture or dry needling or dry cupping or whatever it is. One of the most frequent responses is, I know with 100% certainty that this worked on me. It cured my plantar fasciitis. It cured my chondromalacia in my knee, or it recovered me faster or whatever, or it made me swim super fast. I know at 100% certainty that it worked. And that's one of the main comebacks. That comeback is easy to dismantle, because the comeback from that is, you can't possibly say that you know with 100% certainty that something worked. Your sample size is too small. N equals 1, right? So in order to determine something works, you need a larger sample size in order to determine that it works beyond placebo effect. It's easy to anchor to what you perceive to be is a hit and ignore the misses. The misses are completely off of your radar. And so that's the reason why we have an approach to really figure out whether or not something is working beyond placebo. Double-blind, randomized trials are the way to do that. We also have a discussion about the other frequent response, which is something is ancient or old, therefore it should be trusted. And that's an easy one to knock down as well. It's palpably evident that it can't possibly be logical to suggest that what people thought was true 2,000 years ago, 3,000, 5,000 years ago, could have any bearing on what you should trust today. People that didn't know what thunder was and germs were and things like that. For some reason, people think that is something that should be trusted today. And today, we have so much more knowledge about a whole host of cumulative discovery in medicine and epidemiology, and that is the reason why we employ science and evidence-based approaches as it relates to people and their health and their bodies. So go check out podcast 14 if you haven't already, and check out Britt Marie Hermes on social media. She is playing a very, very important role given her unique experience coming from a naturopathic doctor and coming out of it and all the way over to the other side, which is being a PhD in a scientific discipline. I told her, I hope you write a book. I hope you have a documentary that's going to tell all of this story in something that can be consumed by many people. All right, on to our next podcast clip. During the second season, we were made aware of the fallout of the now defunct Nike Oregon project. So if you're not familiar with what happened there, a coaching think tank out in Oregon was reported to have been using some very abusive and extreme practices, particularly with female athletes. And a runner by the name of Mary Kane released an op-ed in the New York Times, which blew the whistle on the Nike Oregon project. And so I wanted to have a podcast on this issue and highlighting some of the destructive effects of such practices, something that was previously called the female athlete triad, now called RED-S, relative energy deficiency in sport. So I went right to the top, and I was glad that I was able to get her to come on to the podcast. So this clip is from podcast episode 15 with Dr. Margo Mountjoy. She's an MD, PhD, and a member of the International Olympic Committee Games Group. And she led up the work that went into the IOC consensus statement that broadened the explanation of the female athlete triad into what we know to be RED-S. So here is my clip with Dr. Margo Mountjoy. Really sounds to me like it's an integrated approach with nutrition and fueling and the training aspects all intertwined together to get a good result versus just worrying about a weight number and so on.
Absolutely. Actually, I don't really pay much attention to weight numbers per se. We use more sensitive markers like hematological markers. We use body composition and whatnot, as well as training performance parameters to monitor how these athletes are doing. But you're absolutely right. It is an integrated team approach to both prevention and treatment. I work very closely with a registered dietitian. I work very closely on my team with a sport physiologist. We have also a mental health worker, a psychiatrist that works with us, and the coach.
Right.
The coach is a very integral part because if the coach doesn't buy into the prevention and treatment, and when I say we really need to decrease this person's energy output, we need to decrease their mileage or decrease their training load because we're not able to keep up with the nutritional changes, I need that coach on board.
Yeah.
To support this. And so that it really is a multidisciplinary team approach or interdisciplinary team approach in the treatment and prevention of this problem.
One question about amenorrhea. Now, how uncommon is it for a woman to, let's say an elite runner, who's, they usually train to be very, very lean. How uncommon is it for them to lose their period? If they were to train over a macro cycle, let's say a year, or maybe even a year and a half, is it really uncommon for them
to lose their menstruation?
Yeah, for even a short time, for even a month or something.
Yeah. No, it's not uncommon. And in fact, when we cycle someone, I'll kind of say, where we alter their body composition to decrease their mass so that they can run faster, because there is a sweet spot where they will run faster when their mass is lower. We may have the athlete miss 1 or 2 periods, but for a short period of time under very controlled circumstances, I'm not too worried. There's ways to bring the athlete down to the appropriate body composition for speed in a healthy way, and then there's unhealthy ways to bring them down.
Right.
And so if I need to maximize someone's body composition for the Olympic Games or World Championships or elite performance, we can do that. We can do that in a healthy, safe way that minimizes the negative impact on their health. And really at that level of sport, we're walking a fine line between ideal optimum performance and risk of health complications through injury and other things. So it is being able to know what individualized program for that athlete, what their limits are, how far we can push them, and where's the sweet spot for their ideal body composition for performance.
Yeah, and that sweet spot is probably going to be a range versus a one number.
It's definitely a range. It's not a number, it's a range, and it's taking into account all of the parameters. And I like to try and keep them menstruating all year long, but maybe occasionally, certainly at the certain peak times where we have that we try to minimize that. That's why I really don't want them on the birth control pill, because I can't tell. The birth control makes them have, what we call false periods, or has withdrawal bleeds, and we can't actually tell whether they're in trouble.
And
how do you shutting down?
How do you navigate that? So I work with female athletes often, and they'll tell me, well, I have an IUD
for birth control.
they have IUD. Yep. So how do you navigate that to make sure that they're not seeing red S symptoms when?
Right. Well, I use a non-hormonal IUD often in these athletes. It's called copper T. It's not a new form of birth control. It's a very old one. That one does not interfere with hormonal function. Now, there's IUDs with a hormone on them, which does interfere with the ability of the hormonal system to function. I mean, that's how they work. Right. That's how the birth control pill, and that's how these things work, by interfering with the normal hormonal function to suppress ovulation and implantation. So that's why they work so very well.
Right.
However, in these situations where I'm trying to monitor the body's function, where I need to know whether their body's shutting down their hormonal function, I don't want any external hormones interfering with that very clear marker of health, which is regular menstruation. So the copper IUD does not interfere with that, but still provides them with adequate and appropriate birth control, and safe birth control. We do know that the birth control pill can have a negative effect also on bone health. So we try to not have athletes on that, especially athletes that have impact and endurance, to decrease the risk of bone stress injury.
That was a great and important podcast with Dr. Mountjoy. She is definitely busy at the International Olympic Committee, so I appreciate her having that podcast with me. I think the revelations of the Mary Cain situation had and is continuing to have a rippling effect through anyone who is training and coaching athletes for competition against other athletes. And I think ultimately it's going to fuel change in a couple of different ways. First, coaches and coaching platforms are going to have to increase their nutrition bona fides, right? It's not enough anymore to just learn one side of it, the training side. And any coaches that don't have integrated approaches with nutrition are going to be forced to adapt change. Okay, I've seen this in our own practice. I have 3 nutrition certifications now, and I made it a point to make sure that I work with any coaches that we bring on to have a thoughtful, science and evidence-based integrated approach to how we train and coach male and female athletes. So that's going to be important, and I think there's going to be another trend where we're focusing more on things that we coaches previously just ignored in women's physiology, like menstruation and how that impacts the training and racing cycle. Having more discussions around things like birth control and menstruation and the various impacts. And I think having diversity and women on your coaching staff is important. And, just having the contacts and call-outs to professionals when you need them, whether they be dietitians, doctors, physicians, sports psychologists, and others, whenever you have circumstances that might require professional help. On to the next clip, which is from podcast number 16, and that was the podcast with Sara McLarty. And Sara McLarty is a triathlon coach with Swim Like a Pro down in Claremont, Florida. And so oftentimes I will do a little podcast commercial, a video that I create, and I'll post it on social media just to drum up support for the podcast. Just to give you an idea of how popular Sara is, over 1 million people view that video. I think it said something like this video reached over 1 million people. So you've often seen her articles in Triathlete magazine. She's frequently tapped by all of the endurance sport media companies for questions on swimming and articles on swimming. She has a treasure trove of information out on the internet, free workouts and such. And of course, she had an unbelievable triathlon career, professional triathlon career, and she is born out of an unbelievable program at the University of Florida, which birthed some unbelievable swimmers that came out of that program: Ryan Lochte, Elizabeth Beisel, Caleb Dressel, Natalie Hines, and others. So she knows everything there is to know about swimming. So let's take a listen to this clip with Sara McLarty. A lot of triathletes that maybe they came into swimming as an adult, they sort of don't know what to do or how to have structure with swimming, right? Especially they don't swim masters or anything like that. And you go into a pool, you can always tell the triathletes because they sort of just swim back and forth, hang out at the wall. Tony.
They just go back and forth. Right?
Yeah. So that's one of the reasons I think people plateau. They don't know what to do. They just don't know what to do when they go into the pool, and then they just sort of swim back and forth, and then hang out in the wall for 3 minutes, swim back and forth, and such.
And I know you're doing the same thing because you post videos, and
right?
Group practice, and we're doing the same thing, and I always want to I want to tell those people, here, let's use this podcast as an advantage. If you are going to the pool and swimming back and forth, no Olympic swimmer got to where they are. We did not get this fast swimming by going back and forth in the pool.
Right.
Nobody. No, Katie Ledecky, Michael Phelps, Ryan Lochte. I mean, name the ones that people recognize. They swim sets, do sets.
Right. Structure.
Oh, I love it. Structure in the waters. It's the only thing that matters.
And, just something like how to swim on intervals and swimming on intervals and things like that. It's, it seems like that is the one of the ways to, add some, structure to the triathletes workout so that they can start improving. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know, right? And hey, Tony, you and I both know it's more fun that way. I mean, if I need to swim 2,000, I'd rather do 4 different sets, than a 2,000.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, see, I learned all this stuff from you. Now I can take it and charge people for it. No.
You're already doing it.
So for those triathletes that started swimming as an adult and they didn't have the advantage to go through to a Division I swimming program, or even swim and swim team as a
even just
kid.
Swim team. I know, yeah.
For those folks, what's your philosophy? Are you an advocate for a triathlete should have a broad training in all aspects of swimming? So, for instance, non-freestyle strokes, turns, all of that. Should a triathlete learn the full breadth of swimming?
100% yes. And I have a reason. I'll tell you why. As a lifelong swimmer, as somebody whose mom put her in the water at 2 weeks old and was water skiing and surfing and swimming on a swim team year round from the age of 4, what all of that gave me was a comfort and an awareness of the water.
Yep.
So, this is a famous saying. If you do the same thing over and over and expect a different result, that is the definition of what?
Madness.
Insanity. So, The whole concept of if you go to the pool, and let's go back to our previous discussion, if you go to the pool and you swim back and forth for a 2,000 at a moderate pace and you climb out and you do that 3 times a week, and then you come ask Tony, why am I not getting faster in the water? Tony's going to slap you. I mean, that is full on. You are insane if you think that you are going to get better. So not only do we have the whole concept of structured workouts as making us swim harder and faster and steady and, you know, descending and ascending and building and all these things that we do in the pool to teach us how to control our effort. Because, Tony, how many times have our athletes started out the first 100 of a triathlon and then they're hanging on the buoy because they're exhausted?
Exactly.
We teach pacing and awareness of your body so that that doesn't happen. So going back to this specific question of the other strokes and flip turns and streamlining off of the wall and diving into the pool, what that provides you is, how does my body move in the water? How do I control my body in the water? How am I comfortable in the water? And yes, I tell people the easy answer is, well, yeah, I want you to know backstroke in case you need to roll over on your back in the race. And I want you to know breaststroke in case you need to figure out where the buoy is and take a break. But it's not even that. That's my easy answer for the people that I really need to just, you know, all right, we're gonna learn this because I have reason. But in the long term, you know, I am a mermaid in the water. I can do anything you want. You want me to swim down the pool backwards with my right foot out of the water and my head turned to the left? Fine, I can do that, you know? And that is from knowing all these different things. And I like to tell my swimmers too, hey, if you discover how to stream, you know, if we work on your streamline off of the wall under the water, maybe you just have a little more awareness of how to be hydrodynamic when you're swimming freestyle. So all the strokes and all the other things that you learn, they come into making you more comfortable, more confident, more efficient, and more aware of your body in the water, which in the end, Tony, makes you a better freestyle swimmer for that one specific thing that you want to do.
Such a great clip there with Sara McLarty. And by the way, go check out her webpage at I think it's swimlikeapro.com with hyphens in between, Swim Like a Pro. And her Facebook page is pretty active too. She's doing live streams all of the time. If you're a triathlete who struggles with swimming or you plateau with swimming, go listen to episode 16. So I think that was an excellent clip because as a coach who started swimming as an adult and then swam masters, coach masters, became a lifeguard, all of it, I echo everything that she said, that it's important to learn the full breadth of swimming. And it's fun. And so many times I run into athletes who say the same thing. I'm a triathlete. Why do I have to learn non-freestyle strokes? Why do I have to learn turns? Why do I have to do this and that? And it sort of grates like fingernails down a blackboard. And so it's good that I now have a clip that I can share with them that underscores all of the main reasons from someone who really, really knows swimming. And so if you ever go down to Claremont, Florida, go check out the SLAP team. They have an unbelievable, went down. I trained with them, got some advice from Sara on swimming, my own stroke. And they have an unbelievable community down there. Go check them out, Claremont, Florida, Swim Like a Pro. All right, just like that, we're on to the final clip in this best of episode. It seems like we went from 0 to 100 in a blink with this global pandemic. And when it happened, somewhere around March, I reached out to Dr. Nadia Abuelezam. She is an epidemiologist, an assistant professor at Boston College. She has a broad research agenda in inequities in health outcomes and healthcare access in resource-poor settings and vulnerable populations. And so I just wanted to get the lay of the land of what was happening. What are the precautions that people need to take? What does the off-ramp look like? Who are the more disadvantaged potential populations and so on? And she did not disappoint. And she is also an endurance enthusiast. She's a marathoner and a CrossFitter. And so I was able to tie in a couple of questions about our population and get her thoughts on that. She was a great guest, and this was also one of the most downloaded podcasts we have, and it's a very important podcast. So let's take a listen to this clip from episode 18 with Dr. Nadia Abuelezam. So, are there any fluent details about the general risk profile? And there are a lot of listeners of this podcast that are what we call endurance enthusiasts, marathoners, Ironman triathletes, and ultra marathoners and such. And so, I'm thinking about whether or not the risk profile is different for, say, male, female, young, old, healthier versus not as healthy, and then certainly super fit athletic types. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think people have probably heard that those who are older, and I'm not going to say old because older is what we're considering right. 60 and older, do have a higher risk of complications associated with this virus. So what we're finding is that those who are 60 or older tend to have or are more at risk for having complications. The other thing that puts people at risk also is having underlying health conditions. So those can be health conditions related to the respiratory system, so things like asthma, but they can also be chronic diseases like hypertension or diabetes. Obesity is also another one that we're observing right now as chronic health conditions that put people at risk for having complications associated with the coronavirus. We don't have generally population level data yet on overall risk factors, but some evidence out of China suggests that men are more at risk than women. And there is some evidence that children have less severe disease than adults. I have not seen any data with regard to fitness. I have heard many sort of anecdotal stories, which take them for their face value, that sort of no one can really be spared from the potential effects of this virus. There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to some people developing severe illness. I've heard of cases of athletes who are relatively fit who've had to be intubated and are dealing with severe consequences. But then I also know people who have managed to stay healthy despite having known contacts with people who are positive for the virus. So I think right now we just simply don't know enough to say whether or not there are patterns. But I would say that generally from the data that we do have, no one is not at risk. Right. And I just want to emphasize that everyone should really take precautions regardless of how healthy you feel, regardless of how fit you feel. I think it's really important to make sure that you're taking the proper precautions, because it's not only about protecting yourself and making sure that you're able not to be infected, but the reality is your health is connected to your family's health, to your friends' health, and so by protecting yourself, you're actually protecting those around you as well.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think with the endurance enthusiasts, was the environments in which they train or race. Many of the races have been canceled, and I think those were the right decisions, or probably the only decisions that they could have made, canceling the big events like the Boston Marathon and some other races like that. I mean, you're running, your nose is running, you're putting food in your mouth, and then people are slapping high fives with everyone throughout the entire event. Yeah. So that undoubtedly was the right decision. I've gotten questions from the athletes about, hey, coach, can I go swim? And then I was like, yeah, that's a good question. I think United States Masters Swimming released something saying that they're not aware that viruses can be transmitted in chlorinated water. I don't know if you have any perspective about that, but stuff like that. People are asking about running, and there was a recent study from the Netherlands. I don't know if it's high quality or not, looking at droplets that are spread in running and in cycling. And so I think these are some of the things, like you're saying, that there probably isn't a whole lot of data out there on it, but it's something that we really need to take a look at more closely.
Yeah, and I will say that, as I've said to you before, I am a runner myself. I was supposed to run the Ragnar Cape Cod Relay later in May.
Really?
And I had been training for that, and I will say, take this for face value in terms of my own behavior, but I am going out for runs. I am trying to avoid interacting with people on those runs. If I do see another runner out, I will try to go to the other side of the street if possible. I'll try to keep some distance. And so I think, being outside is generally healthy. There is some evidence, although I will say that I wouldn't sort of advocate for this, but sort of the UV rays of the sun can have some protective benefits as well. So thinking about getting outside and running may not be a bad idea. I don't know enough about swimming to say anything concretely about that. But that's sort of what I'm doing right now myself.
Yeah. So that was near the beginning of April, when things were still very fluid and dynamic, and they're actually still very fluid and dynamic. But everything she said there pretty much holds true even to today, as it is just the beginning of June. And that was before the statewide, in many states, statewide mask mandates, and everyone now has to go out and wear a mask, even when you're running now, which many of the athletes find very annoying, having to go out and run with a mask on your face. But what we have to do is what we have to do. And I think that was a great podcast. I highly recommend you go out and find Dr. Abuelezam on Twitter. Her handle there is at NABUELEZAM. So we couldn't have predicted anything like this. And we now have confirmation that the Boston Marathon, which was postponed to September, couldn't possibly have gone on in September. And so we have received confirmation that that is canceled for the year. And all of the races are canceled for the summer, which puts us as endurance enthusiasts in a very weird situation, doing absolutely nothing during the summer as far as racing is concerned. And like I said previously, we are taking up indoor training, indoor cycling, running with precautions, swimming in open water with social distancing protocols and all of that and such. But it will be the first time that there's just no racing going on in the summertime, it feels very, very weird. Our athletes in the Event Horizon community are adapting. We've coached and helped our athletes adapt. And hopefully, by the latter half of this year, we'll have better information about reliable testing and vaccination. If you're subscribed to Event Horizon Endurance Sport on YouTube, and if you're not, I really hope you do subscribe. The link is in the show notes. You will find a video that I uploaded where I am giving 3 potential trends and impacts to the health, fitness, and endurance sport community as a result of the global pandemic. So take a look at that. And so congratulations. We've made it to the end of our second best of episode of the Endurance Experience podcast and the end of season 2. I think you're going to really enjoy season 3 as I've gotten a little better at this podcasting thing, and the Endurance Experience is gaining in exposure. And so I have some great podcasts lined up for season 3. In one of our Facebook live streams, I talked about how during the late 90s and early 2000s, everybody and their mother had a blog. And if you remember that, through the 2000s and the 2010s, everybody and their mother had a blog, and they sort of slowly but surely were killed by podcasts. And audio podcasts became the big thing. And for the next 10 years, through the, basically where we are now, podcasts are now becoming the new blog, right? So now everybody and their mother has a podcast. And the last time I looked at the statistics with Apple was saying that there are 500 new podcasts a day, almost 1 million podcasts total out in existence. So, and I'm looking at this and I'm trying to come up with new ways to gain listeners, broaden our listener base. And it looks like, the next evolution, the next big thing is live video podcasts. And so I'm experimenting now with this for season 3. And that if you like our Facebook page and you like our YouTube channel, you might see some live recorded video podcasts, and the audio will be available in the same format. And so if you have been looking at what's been happening in the news, Joe Rogan, who has the world's biggest podcast, signed a deal with Spotify, where Spotify is basically adapting their whole platform for the live video podcast that Joe Rogan does. And so this is, I think, probably going to be the next mainstream adaptation of podcasts. And so I'm looking at this. And I still like the long-form conversation. The long-form conversation is where we dive deeper into issues and can have a conversation and a discussion and really distill what we're trying to talk about versus the 5-6 minute sound bites that you hear on the news and such. So I'm going to stick with the long form format. Some of these podcasters that are dropping 15-minute podcasts, I think that is not enough time to really get into the meat and potatoes of these issues. I have started breaking down the discussion topics within the podcast into smaller, bite-sized, more digestible clips, which you can find on the YouTube channel. I'm still experimenting with the frequency. I think I've been every 3 to 4 weeks right now. I am working to, maybe get that out a little quicker, but I'm more interested in making sure the content is quality and edited well. So look for more great information to come, and definitely like us on all of our social media platforms so you can be involved in all of the new things that we have coming. So this is the Endurance Experience podcast. See you for season 3.
Follow Event Horizon Endurance Sport on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter for training programs and services. To become a member of our Endurance Institute or for a complete archive of podcasts, log on to our website, eventhorizon.tv.